Hello and welcome to another edition of WaveLab Workflows. My name is Justin Perkins. In this edition, I'm going to discuss, the importance and benefits of using a dedicated mastering DAW such as WaveLab, as opposed to maybe something that's designed more for mixing and recording and production. There is some overlap, but there's also a number of things that WaveLab and any mastering DAW just factually does. And those other programs can't do. So I'm going to be talking about that and some other things. Thanks for tuning in again. If there's any issues with the sound, I'll keep an eye on the comments, so feel free to let me know. Thanks, Matthias, for always tuning in from Sweden. Benny from Sweden. Got a lot of people. It's probably evening for you. I know we're doing this at a new date and time, but part of the reason here is WaveLab, or Steinberg is doing a promotion on WaveLab. It's 40% off until February 4th. That's for any full purchases or any upgrades if you happen to have an earlier version of WaveLab, such as 10 or 9.5. And also, if you have WaveLab Elements, you can get up to the Pro version, and everything is on the Steinberg website. There's also a users group on Facebook called WaveLab Users Group, and I run that. There's a lot of people in there, other WaveLab users that can help you out with any issues. Before we get into it, some of the main differences between Pro and Elements. One big thing that comes to my mind is in Elements, you can't really define where the CD tracks start and end. The CD tracks are just the length of each clip. Whereas in WaveLab Pro, you can, aside from arranging the songs and clips to adjust the song spacing, you can also decide where the track markers are going to go, because sometimes you want a little bit of a breath before the song starts, things like that. Also in cases where songs crossfade or overlap, that gets a little tricky. And Elements can't create a DDP file, which is used for CD production, and some of you may think CDs are dead, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Even though CDs are not selling as well as they used to, I think most mastering studios still send out a lot of CD masters every week, every month, and we still kind of base mastering an EP or an album around the CD concept of the songs are in a certain order. They have a certain amount of space between each other. So just because sales are down doesn't mean programs like WaveLab are becoming obsolete or anything like that. In fact, I use it every day, all day. So I'll talk about that. There's some other restrictions to Elements as far as the number of plug-in slots, and the metering is a little bit more simplified, and some of the analysis tools are a little more simplified. There's no analog routing in Elements. So if you're kind of deciding which version to get, I think with the current sale and promotion that Steinberg is offering, it's really a great time to get up to WaveLab Pro, because there's just so many little things, in my opinion. Elements is a good place to get started, to get a feel for it, but the Pro version is, I think, just a really great tool and a good value. So I guess let's get started here. I've done a little bit of an intro, and I've talked about some of the features and facts. I'm going to go through them, but there's just some things that, something like Cubase or Pro Tools just simply doesn't do for the mastering process. So I'll talk about that as we get into it. I got into WaveLab the day that it came to Mac, because I was a Mac user, and I was trying to use WaveBurner, which was made by Apple, and they've discontinued it. It was a very basic program. Apple discontinued it, and I was outgrowing it, and I was really happy to hear that WaveLab came to Mac. So I jumped on that because I think, like a lot of engineers, I was a Mac user, and I don't want to debate Mac versus PC, whatever works for you. But since I already had a Mac system, it wasn't really inviting to me to get a Windows system just to run something like Sequoia or Sequoia, Pure Mix. A lot of the mastering programs were PC only, including WaveLab up through version 6. Version 7 was the first version that was on Mac, so I didn't really want to get a PC just to get a great mastering program. So WaveLab came at the perfect time for me. And there's a lot of people using WaveLab now, such as Glenn Schick. He's a very well-known mastering engineer in the US. Bob Weston and some of the guys at Chicago Mastering Service. Pete Lyman and some of the people at Infrasonic in Nashville are using WaveLab. Katie Tavini in the UK, Margaret at Welcome to 1979 in Nashville, the mastering engineer and cutting engineer there. She's using WaveLab. I know some of the people from Airshow Mastering have at least been exploring WaveLab recently. I'm not sure if they've made the transition. Chris Athens has talked about using WaveLab, and he actually recently joined the WaveLab users group on Facebook, so I'm assuming he's starting to use it or using it. Every time I see a computer shot over at Bernie Grunman in LA, which is one of the great mastering studios of all time, there's usually a screenshot or picture of WaveLab in the background there. So there's a lot of people using WaveLab, and a number of lesser known but very busy mastering engineers using WaveLab for a specific reason, which again I'm going to talk about. And a lot of people think about mastering as the plugins and the processing and the fun stuff, the emulations of this gear or the new technology of that gear. And WaveLab does come with a lot of great plugins, which I'll show you. They have Master Rig, which is similar to Ozone in that there's a lot of different modules you can add all in one plugin: EQ, dynamics, limiting, imaging. But honestly, the reason I use WaveLab is just for the features and the workflow stuff that I'm going to kind of guide you through here. The plugins it comes with, in my opinion, are nice to have, but it's not the reason why I use WaveLab or any mastering program. It's more about like I said, the feature set that I'm going to talk about. And there was one, before I get into it, Soundblade was a popular Mac mastering tool. And I've seen a lot of Soundblade users come over to WaveLab because Soundblade is now discontinued, is my understanding. They weren't able to make it 64-bit and keep developing it. So I've also seen a lot of Soundblade users migrating over to WaveLab in the last year or two. So, in this tutorial, I'm not really going to be teaching mastering, how to do mastering. I've done a lot of videos over on wavelabhelp.com, a lot of live streams that get a little bit more into mastering and some of the workflows and processes. But this isn't really going to be a mastering tutorial. It's going to be more about what WaveLab can do for you if you're trying to do mastering and mixing DAW and things like that. And if you are looking for more in-depth, if something catches your eye, I suggest going to wavelabhelp.com. And I probably have done a video on that topic, whether it's metadata or using analog gear or working on singles, albums, all these topics. I've got about 12 videos, I think. Yeah, this is number 13. So go over there. There's tons of videos. There's also some presets that you can download as far as, not necessarily mastering presets, but layout presets, render presets, metadata presets, all sorts of stuff. And it's all free. wavelabhelp.com. So I'm just going to take a quick look at the questions one last time. Is there monitor volume available? Well, there is a speaker configuration in the master section, which I'll get to. I believe Cubase also has a master section. So let's get into it. This is the default layout that you'll see when you open WaveLab. And I have customized it a little bit because, as you can see, there's meters here, there's meters here, there's meters all over the place. There's this thing called the master section. And this is a powerful section, but it can be a little confusing, especially to new users, because that's the most obvious place to insert plugins. But the thing you need to know about the master section is that it's global. Any file that I have open, let me open a file, whether it's this file or this file, anything I play is going to be going through that master section. So it's useful. I'll get into where it's useful and not useful, but I just want to explain what that is over there. There's other places to insert plugins that, in my opinion, are a little more logical and make sense for the mastering workflow, because the master section needs to be loaded and saved separately. But we can give you a quick rundown. There's a place for plugins. I believe it's up to 15 slots now. There's a great section called playback processing. That is where you could put various additional meters that you might want, or headphone and room correction software. basically things you want to see and hear, but not be included in the render path, because I'm sure you all know what happens if you render your files with the SonarWorks EQ on your mix. It sounds bad. And another thing that WaveLab comes with is the Encoder Checker. It lets you hear what it might sound like as an AAC file or MP3. And that's a great place to put that, because you would never want to render your files with that processing on. It's more of an audition. So you get 5 slots for various meters, correction software, anything you want to see and hear but not be accidentally rendered, or to influence the meters. Room correction is going to add gain and subtract gain, and you don't want that to influence your mastering meters. So that's another great thing about that. And then, as I mentioned, the speaker configuration. You can have some various configurations. I personally don't use it. I keep everything at 0 and I keep it hidden. So this is the default layout. This is a layout that I like to use. A little more simplified, and I know I don't have any files open yet, but I want to mention that WaveLab does have a batch processor, which is handy if you want to process a bunch of files with the same plugin chain, or sample rate convert them, any number of things you can do in the batch processor. You can load plugin chains, all sorts of stuff. The batch processor is not something I use a lot in mastering, because I'm doing things a little more custom tailored, but there's a batch processor. But aside from that, there's basically 2 different workspaces in WaveLab. There's the audio editor, which I've already showed you a little bit with this audio file. So you'll notice it says audio editor right here. This is a destructive environment, probably good for maybe sound design, broadcast. I use it for analyzing files, whether it's incoming files that I'm about to master, or files that I've rendered and want to double check before sending them out. It's a good place to do quality control, because you have all sorts of good metering here in WaveLab. And you can customize the layout. You can put these meters on a different screen if you have multiple screens. You can do a whole lot of custom layout stuff, and you can save it, as you can see here, as whatever your layout, whatever you want it to be, you can save that and always get it back. So the audio editor is a destructive environment. And again, I really only use it for analysis. You can actually analyze the file and get some loudness specifications for it. You can see that it's minus 9.1 LUFS integrated. You can see a bunch of other readings about it. There is a 3D analysis that looks pretty interesting. So for me, the audio editor is more of a place for quality control, whether it's incoming files or outgoing files. The main place that I like to work is the audio montage. And I've had people tell me that they only use the audio montage if they're compiling a CD or an album or something. But in reality, I think the audio montage is the place to work in WaveLab. It's where I do all my work, 100% of it. Whether I'm mastering a single song or an EP or an album or something a little outside my norm, it's always in the audio montage, because that acts like a little more of a traditional DAW, in the sense that you have a montage file, which is a small file that tells WaveLab where to put everything. So, and then that also stores, inside the montage, we have the inspector, and that allows you to put plugins in a bunch of different slots, which I will go over shortly here. But the audio montage, in my opinion, that's where you want to work if you're doing any sort of mastering. Because with the destructive environment, if you are trying to master in the audio editor and you do a little fade out on this file, sometimes clients can be a little bit indecisive, and maybe they want a slightly different fade out or a little bit different. That's kind of hard to manage in the audio editor because it's so destructive. It's hard to undo things. So audio montage is where it's at, in my opinion, because you can do, I'll kind of do a quick walkthrough. You can import the files, which isn't anything too special, but there are some mastering focused features here. So I'm selecting, I have 6 files. It's kind of like a mini album, an EP, just to kind of demonstrate for today. And you'll notice that before the files are imported, it's going to ask me, what order do you want the files to be in? Because that's a big part of mastering, is sequencing the songs. Putting in not only in the correct order, but the correct spacing between the songs. And And I know that you can do that in Cubase and all this stuff, but there's, again, special features that make it even more slick and great for mastering. So you can, of course, manually drag the files in the correct order. You can use key commands to do it really quickly, which is what I do to determine the song order. Or there's a new feature that lets you sort by the track metadata. So if you, for some reason, have metadata in the files already that determine the song order, you press one button and the songs are in that order. And when you load them in, you get a few options. You can line them all up on one track like this. You can do what I prefer and stagger them across tracks. I like this layout because one thing that maybe you don't know about WaveLab is you can put effects right on each song. It's called clip effects. And this is a really efficient way to work because you still get a lot of screen real estate, but you can put effects right on each song directly, and it's not on a track. There are track effects, but for me, it's a really efficient way to work because it saves a lot of screen space. It also saves a lot of CPU because before I used to use WaveLab, I was trying to do a lot of work in Pro Tools, whether it was with analog gear or not. And I'm sure you've all either done this or seen this. You can do this kind of layout. But in my opinion, that's really inefficient because now you have really small waveforms. You can't see them all. And then also, if you're using track effects, you have to put a plugin on each audio track. Depending on how the DAW works, you could be using up a lot of computer power when you don't need to because you're running plugins on each track. Let's say you're playing song 3. In a lot of cases, and some DAWs are getting better, but in some cases, the plugins for track 1 could still be running and bogging down your computer. If there's any plugins that make analog noise, it could be adding a little bit of that analog simulated noise. There's a whole number of reasons why I don't care for this layout because it's just so inefficient on the screen, on the CPU, all sorts of things. When I used to do this in Pro Tools, by the time I got to the 12th song on an album, the computer could be bogging down pretty hard because there's so many plugins running. Whereas if you do either the 1 or 2 track approach, it's way more efficient on the CPU because when I'm playing song 1, only the plugins for song 1 are running. And then that also opens up the opportunity to crossfade songs, have them overlap a little bit, and you can kind of manage the crossfades. So I'll get into a little bit more of that shortly. But I just wanted to show you the basics of importing files into the montage. And again, you have clip effects for each song. You can use track effects, though I rarely use them. And then you have montage output effects, which would be sort of like your master fader. The flow, the signal flow is clip effects, track effects, output. So basically you could put any plugins, per song, EQ each song how it needs to be, process each song how it needs to be. On the montage output, you could put something like a final limiter or dithering or a true peak limiter, anything that you want to affect all the songs equally after you've processed them individually. And you can, of course, just skip around. That's the other advantage, well, one of the many advantages of mastering DAWs. You have all the songs in one session. You can skip around and hear them and compare them really quickly and decide if they all sound good together. Does one song need a little bit of work? Does one song sound a little quiet? Does one intro sound a little quiet? Maybe this intro sounds too quiet, and you can do a little volume automation to bump it up a little bit. Obviously you can fade out songs. If this song was meant to fade out, I can just click and drag and fade it out. And again, it's all non-destructive. And I haven't even gotten to things like track markers yet. The difference between clip effects and track effects, a clip effect is only affecting this clip, and you can see on top it says a free society. That means any plugins in this green area are only affecting the clip right here called a free society. A track effect, you'll notice it says track 1, and that would affect, in this case, it would affect songs 1, 3, and 5, which would be very awkward, which is why I don't use track effects very often because it's pretty rare that I would want to do that. And then the third option, is the montage output. Everything goes through this section after it's the last thing of the montage. And again, there still is the master section, which I keep hidden. That comes after everything in the montage, but you have to manually save and load this section. And the way my brain works, I would forget to either load or save or both. It leaves too much room for something to go wrong. Now, if you're using the audio editor, that's the only place you can insert plugins, and you have to just remember to save and load that. And there's some presets to help you automatically do it, but still takes a little bit of, you got to use some caution and be a little bit careful when using the master section because it is global. And again, that's why I just keep plugins out of it and keep it hidden. So hopefully that explains the difference between clip effects and track effects. And I guess the reason why it could be confusing is track is not referring to CD track or album track. It's referring to the actual audio track 1 or track 2. And you can rename these if you want to. I typically don't bother naming them because everything's named by album track, as you can see here. So that's some basics of loading in the montage. Now, a couple quick things for working quickly. I'm going to save this so I can stop seeing that. One of my favorite things about WaveLab is the save and render dialog box. It's all editable manually. You can see the way I have things laid out. I can just copy the band name, copy the album name, use a little shortcut to call it what I like to call initial projects, version 1. And the cool thing is that the montage file is saved directly next to where these files came from. This little green W, that's the WaveLab montage file. It's only 23 kilobytes. So it's kind of like your Cubase or Pro Tools session file where it doesn't contain any audio. It just tells WaveLab where everything goes. So let's do that. Now, I was getting a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to re-import these tracks in the correct order. So open that. Open that. Again, it's very quick to determine the song order. I'm going to put it in the order I intended to. WaveLab also has lanes, which I'll get into. I'll use tracks for today's purposes. I'm going to save that. Now, this is where I would kind of go in and listen to the end of this song and decide, when should the next song kick in? And these are already pre-trimmed nicely, but, if there was some noise at the start, you can obviously just trim it up and do that. Or if this note hangs on too long, it's very easy to non-destructively trim it up and fade it out a little faster. I could overlap these two songs. So I'm doing this quickly for the sake of the video, but it's so fast and easy to just kind of assemble the album. And another benefit of using a mastering DAW is when you're mastering, you really only want to assemble the album once. Whether it's for the digital release, the vinyl pre-master, the CD master. The benefit of WaveLab here is you're assembling it once as far as entering in the titles, the metadata, doing the song spacing, doing the track markers, and then you can branch off of that. Once this is approved, I could do save as and make a vinyl master or a cassette master. If the artist needs to hear a louder version or a little more bass or something, I can just save as version 2. Everything else stays the same. The song spacing's locked in, all the titles. And again, no matter what format my client needs, I'm only assembling the project one time, and I can create vinyl master files, 1 file per side with a nice PDF, all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to show you the CD Wizard. I have a Stream Deck, which is a little add-on. I'm sure most people know what a Stream Deck is. If you don't, you can Google it. It's a little thing to create shortcuts on shortcuts, but the slow way is bring up the CD Wizard, and this is going to put in the track markers for me. And there's a whole lot of options. You can watch some of my videos to learn more about all these options, but the fast way, you can save a preset to your liking. And now I have track markers for every song. And as I skip to them, you can drag it to offset it from the first downbeat a little bit. In this crossfade, I would have to manually decide, where do I want the track transition to occur. Probably right about there. Again, you can clean that up. The nice thing is that the markers are bound to the clip. So as you change things, you get the markers go with it. And it has what's called ripple mode, which I think Reaper has ripple mode. I don't know about Cubase and Pro Tools, but the nice thing is if the client says, I want a little more space between songs 1 and 2, you can do that. And all the other relationships stay the same. So this is really handy for mastering. The markers move, the clip relationships stay the same, things like that. So I always go in and just double check my markers. And this is all stuff that's really mastering focus. I can blow up the waveform and make sure there's no hissing or dead space or dead air or noises. I could fade them out. I could fix them another way. So it's a really fast way to it's kind of like a microscope. When I started using WaveLab, I felt like I got this huge microscope compared to what I was doing in Pro Tools. I used to be a Pro Tools user. I never got the hang of Cubase, but that's not really the point. But WaveLab just feels like a big microscope compared to a mixing and recording DAW. So let's say I'm happy with the track spacing. As you can see, the markers take on the name of the clip. So if your files are cleanly named, you don't have any additional work to do. If your files are not cleanly named, you can quickly clean up the track marker name to be exactly the song title. And cleaning up the track marker names, you don't want to do the clips tab, you want to do the marker name. That makes your life so much easier downstream because I'm going to call up, first I'm going to copy the name of this project. You'll see why. I'm going to call up the CD text editor and just enter in the artist name and album title, and I can use these buttons to quickly populate the track names. It's all in there. So what I've done is I've just entered in CD text, and you're probably thinking CD text is a thing of the past. But the thing about how WaveLab works is once you have the CD text entered, all that information gets populated to metadata. So when you render the files, these are going to be flush with metadata, and I don't have to enter the metadata after the fact. I don't have to enter the metadata anymore. It's already entered. I don't have to redo it. I don't have to keep entering it for all the different formats I make or the different versions that I make. So that's why, getting a couple things right from the start makes your life as a mastering engineer easier downstream, because now I never have to think about the song titles or entering them as CD text or metadata. And that's a big reason why I use WaveLab. So somebody said Cubase doesn't have ripple mode. So again, that's, for those that don't know what ripple mode is, that's when all the files after it move. And maybe a mixing program doesn't really need ripple mode. Certainly handy in mastering. You can turn it off. It's not always like that. There's so many features. It's going to be hard to fit every little feature in, but this is more of a broad overview. So let's say, I haven't even done any mastering work yet. I like to get some of the housekeeping and just general cleanup out of the way, getting the album trimmed up, the heads and tails, the song spacing, things like that. One thing that's really helpful, in my opinion, people talk about normalization a lot with audio, and it's a common word for streaming services and all that. I think normalization is even more useful for before you even start mastering, because, these songs are a little bit different loudness. And that's a part of the mastering engineer's job, is to figure out the loudness. But one thing you can do, WaveLab in the Montage has a meta normalizer. And it has a lot of options, but quickly, what I'm going to say is the settings I like to use, and again, this is all available on the wavelabhelp.com website. The settings I like to use are going to normalize all the songs to the same, basically to the same maximum short-term LUFS. That means the loudest part of each song is going to be the same level, and that makes for a really great starting point. No matter how you like to work, I think that makes for a really great starting point. That means when I apply this, if I just listen through it without doing anything else, it may not sound amazing, but I won't be tempted to change my volume level. So that just gets all the songs on a good starting point, a good place to start, a good foundation. So I'm going to press apply. And the nice thing about this is it's non-destructive. So if I go into the clips tab, The clips tab is really nice because it tells you where every clip starts and ends, or every song, what track it's on. You can change tracks. But more importantly, it adjusts the gain, the clip gain, and it's pre-gain means that it's before any clip effects. So that's one of the first things I like to do is just get all the songs to the same loudness, roughly. I still use my ears, of course, and fine-tune it. But that gets you 98% there. And again, it's non-destructive, so it's not making new files. It's just simply, it's a really clean way to do it. It's not degrading the audio. It is just simply getting all the songs to be on the same page loudness-wise. And then this is where I could pick a song to start with. Maybe the second song. I don't always start with the first song because sometimes the first song is an intro or a little bit different. Usually the second or third song is a good starting point. But whatever song you want to start with, you can start adding clip effects. So like I said, WaveLab comes with a ton of plugins built in. It has an EQ. It has sort of the flagship Master Rig plugin. And again, Master Rig has all these modules you can add. EQ, compressor, all this stuff. So you can dial in the song to your liking. You can save plugin chains. So this is kind of a big plugin chain, but I can load in something that I've saved with some third-party plugins. That makes for a good starting point. And I don't use it. A lot of times I'll get rid of some that I don't need. And you know, the EQ is not doing anything, but it's ready for action. It's ready to do stuff. So you can kind of load things up, and you can even see here with my normalization settings and my plugin chain presets, it's always right at the point where some gain reduction is just barely starting to happen. And then I can fine tune and decide how much to do. And as you can see, the loudness is already at, minus 14, which is not a target. I'm obviously going to make it louder, but it gets me right in a ballpark of where I can start. And I can even add a limiter in the montage output. And without even really thinking about it, I'm already in the minus 10, minus 9 range without even, minus 12. So this gets me in the ballpark. Obviously, you got to use your ears and make it sound great, but there's so many repetitive tasks and things that you can sort of automate and streamline to get you to the fun stuff a little faster. So again, clip effects only affecting this song. So watch when I play this song, it's going through this EQ. If I play this song, not going through this EQ or any of these plugins, but it is going through the montage output section. So again, just a really cool thing that basically most mixing DAWs don't have. It's a really logical way to work, in my opinion, for mastering. Got a nice message from Michael Romanowski at Coast Mastering. He just had a nice interview on Bobby Osinski's podcast about Atmos mastering, so you should check that out if you are interested in that. So back to WaveLab. That's kind of a very quick overview of how I just would get a normal EP or album started. But with mastering, a lot of people think of mastering as the stereo processing, but there's so much more involved in mastering. We got to render the formats. We got to make sure we have to quality control. We have to play with the song spacing, whether it's, whether songs overlap or it needs a certain amount of space between the songs. And again, you can see this song has a downbeat. This is a capture from analog, so there's 200 milliseconds of silence built into this file for me. But if it wasn't, and it was like I have to crop it, and then I could determine where the track marker, how much space do you want before you want maybe 200 milliseconds is good. Some people do a little more on a classical record, maybe closer to 1 second. That's really your call. There's no standard, but it is something you want to manage, and it's so much easier to manage in a program like this, because eventually when we render these files, we're going to render a wave file for each track. So I'll get to that in a little bit. So obviously you want to dial in your sounds. All this is saved within the montage. One thing you can do if you want, you can copy this effects chain, and you can paste it to all the other ones. If you want to use that as a starting point for the rest of the songs. Let me close this out and reopen it. Great menu for reopening recent files. So I can't tell you how to master for streaming because it's honestly, that could be a whole different podcast, but it's also not something you want to overthink. But if you, there are some tutorials on that on the WaveLab help website. So let's talk about reference tracks. Reference tracks are new to WaveLab 10. Now we're on WaveLab 11 now, but they came in WaveLab 10. Reference tracks are basically what they sound like. They are a special type of track. And you can make new tracks right here with the plus sign. I have a shortcut. Reference tracks have an R on them to tell you they're a reference track. The quick version is reference tracks are where you'd want to put audio that you want to reference but not be part of your project ever in terms of rendering or going through the plugin chain. So as you can see, let's do this. One thing you can do is I can copy these clips to the reference track, and I can omit the plugins, I can omit the volume changes, I can omit any gain and panning. So what I have here is the original unmastered mixes, let's say, but without any plugins and without any gain changes, so exactly as they came in. So without any changes, basically. And what I can do is press the little ear button here, and now I'm listening to the reference track. And that might not seem very special because you can solo tracks in your mixing DAW, but the cool thing about reference tracks is they don't go through the processing chain. What you're seeing here is this track, so I guess let me turn it down. So as you can see, I'm listening to the file on the reference track 3. And it's not going through my limiter, which is important because if you're trying to make sure you're doing better than the original mix, you wouldn't want it to travel through your processing, whether it's the master section or any montage plugins. The reference tracks totally bypass any processing within the montage. So it's a great place to put the unmastered mixes. It's a great place to put, for those that already do mastering, it's a great place to put what we often get is the rough masters from the mix engineer. Mix engineers often send out mixes with some or a lot of limiting to get the mix approved, and then they turn that off to master from. This is a great track to put your the rough masters from the mix engineer, so you can very quickly get an idea of what the artist or band signed off on. Because you want to obviously A, know what they signed off on, and B, make it at least that good, ideally better. So reference tracks are just really powerful for that. You can also drag you could, if you had a different song, like from a different artist that you grab from a CD or a download from Bandcamp or something, you can drag, if someone says we want it to sound like this particular song, you can drag any file or import any file to this track and reference it that way. And again, the nice thing is that it's not influencing the metering or going through any plugins that's already inserted, which would be a problem in like something like Pro Tools or Cubase. If you did this, it would still be traveling through your master output. So it's a really quick way to A/B. You can also route the reference track to a different hardware output. So if you're using a bigger audio interface with multiple outputs, and that's what I do, I send the reference tracks to, maybe outputs 3 and 4, and then I don't even have to solo it. I can just press play, and I can toggle on my monitor controller between what I'm working on and the reference track and just A/B it that way with the press of a button on the monitor controller. Reference tracks can have live inputs. So you could find a way to rig up Spotify or Apple Music to be feeding the reference track if you want to A/B something from a streaming service or a CD player or a turntable. Things of that nature. But the other really cool thing about reference tracks, aside from sonics, I didn't think to have an example on hand, but the other thing that mastering engineers often get is a single file of the entire album as one file. And that's because the artist maybe has an idea of how the song should transition and segue and overlap. So what you can do, I'm just going to completely make this up. Let me do it this way. Just give me a moment here. Basically what I'm trying to say is you can load in a file just to use for the sake of visually lining up the files that you're mastering to an existing file that they may like. So let me just do a quick render to the desktop so I can find it quickly. There must be a plugin happening somewhere still. Oh yeah, these all have. Bear with me here. There's a cool new feature called Remove All Plugins from Selected Clips. That just came in the latest update, and I just used it. It's very handy. So I just rendered a long file for the sake of demonstration. Let's say the artist provided me with this file because they said, this is exactly how we want the songs to flow. It doesn't even, usually it's an MP3. It can be done in GarageBand, or it can be the worst sounding thing. But the point is, visually, you get a nice representation of how they want it, and then you can line up your files. The reference track doesn't partake in the ripple stuff, so it's a lot of the settings for reference tracks are independent, so you could line up your songs with exactly how they want it to crossfade and things like that. I use this all the time because I get clients that send me an MP3 of how they want things to flow, and then it's a matter of just looking, lining up the waveforms, the peaks, the samples, and then also listening and making sure it sounds like it's meant to sound. So reference tracks are great for sequencing when the client already has an idea of what they want. I tend to not clean up files before going through the analog chain, unless it's a really major plosive that's going to engage some dynamics. I tend to print everything as is because sometimes what you think is noise is something the artist wants. And if you clean up something before the analog chain and they want it back in, that's a lot of backtracking. Whereas if you print everything as is in terms of heads and tails, breaths, squeaks, talking, stick clicks. Can't tell you how many times I've removed a stick click and they say, oh, we wanted the stick clicks in there. It's things like that. So I print everything as is, and then I trim it up after the capture before the final limiting and rendering, of course. That way it's easy to get back if we need to get back to it, which isn't super often, but that way you're not redoing the analog chain and all that stuff. It's a lot quicker. The learning curve, I would say in general, I would say there's not a lot of relation between Cubase and WaveLab. I mean, it's made by Steinberg. There are some similarities, certainly plugin wise, and some terminology and things like that. But WaveLab does have a learning curve, which is honestly part of why I have the website, wavelabhelp.com. I started helping people with WaveLab organically because I wanted WaveLab to have more users, because I wanted to make sure Steinberg kept making WaveLab. And obviously they have been. It's been a very successful program. But the learning curve is not, you're not going to learn it in 1 hour. So it takes a little time, and that's why I have all these videos. But I think if you're doing mastering every day, or even almost every day, once you get over that learning curve, it pays off big time, because you'll get your work done faster, more accurately, more repetitive. You can develop systems. It's just I can't. There's a reason why I use WaveLab and not mixing DAW, and so many other mastering engineers use this, and it's not because we have to make CD masters. I mean, it's and things like that. There's kind of this unspoken myth that you only need this to make CD masters. And yes, it does make CD masters, but even if CDs completely died out, CD sales are apparently up again for the first time in 17 years. Part of that is because vinyl's getting harder to create, so people are going back to CDs. But my whole point is, doing it in WaveLab, you can render any format. You can render WAV files for streaming. You can render your vinyl sides. You can render a CD master, reference MP3s, anything you need, WAV files of any bit depth and sample rate. And you only have to assemble at one time, which is the beauty of it. That's where it can save you a lot of time and accuracy. You want the spacing and flow of the CD master to be the same as the streaming master and the vinyl master. You don't want to have to reassemble each version and risk making a mistake, or make a mistake, or even have to think about it. It's just so easy to do it in one program that is actually meant for the task. So it's important to think about what mastering is not just the stereo processing. It's also the assembly, the authoring, we used to call it and still do, rendering the master files. There's a lot more to mastering than just the stereo processing. Yeah, I think any mastering engineer will tell you that. We spend a lot of time doing other tasks that WaveLab helps with. I'm just going to take a pause to read a question and grab a drink of water. So let's move on from reference tracks. I just really wanted to show you that because sometimes people tell me they're still on version 9.5, and I think, wow, I mean, 9.5 was a good version, but I use reference tracks on almost every project now because, once you can set them up first, or as I showed you, even if you're almost done mastering and you say, oh, wow, I want to, I wonder if I've made this better. Have I made this better? You can simply open a reference track and copy the clips to it. And again, you can include or omit, the changes you made. I would want a clean version without any processing, and there you have a direct comparison. It's perfectly in sync. You can hop around like crazy. When I'm working for real, I'm usually hopping around from song to song like crazy to compare them, listening to each chorus, listening to each intro, things like that. And the other thing that I've doing more in recent years is before I finally render, I like to just listen to the start of each song, because that's how some people are going to listen to it. They're going to skip to song 2, song 3 to see if they like something. So in WaveLab, it's really easy to just, skip around from marker to marker and hit play. And see, does this song feel like it comes in too loud? Is it supposed to come in loud? Is it supposed to come in quiet? Things like that. It just helps you to have it all in one handy session. And, these CD markers are different than just your typical track markers in a DAW because they stick to the files. These are splice markers. You can do special start and end markers, but I like to keep it with the splice markers. I'm just checking my notes here. I skipped over the metering a little bit initially because I didn't have any files loaded, but let's check out the metering. Again, I've just removed all my plugins, so it's not as loud as it might be, but the meter I look at most in WaveLab is the loudness meter because it's showing me the LUFS readings. And there's LUFS has 3, I guess, variations. There's integrated, which is either the entire song or the entire playback, whatever, integrated is the entire piece of whatever you're thinking about, whether it's the playback, if you're just playing back the chorus, or the entire song being measured. Short term is, I believe, a 3-second window, and momentary is momentary. So that's why you see the 3 meters. But I don't want to name any names, but there's one popular mastering platform on Mac where, unless they changed it recently, the integrated loudness doesn't reset on playback. Watch, every time I press play, it resets, which is what you want because, again, that's a time-based loudness measurement. So the fact that WaveLab does that is already one step above another program I'm thinking of, because you wouldn't want to have to manually reset that. And if it doesn't reset, you're going to get false readings, because if you play a quiet part and don't reset it and play a loud part, now you got inaccurate readings. So the nice thing is that it resets. There is a level meter that has RMS measurements and peak measurements. Again, this is not very loud yet, but it also has a nice panning meter. It kind of shows you the balance, if things are leaning left or right. This is not a meter, but I don't want to forget it. Another huge difference between a mastering program and your mixing program is the time code, because we're all familiar with the time code or the bars and beats, which have really no meaning in mastering. But the time code is really essential in a mastering program, because while the timeline that you're seeing here above the clips is 1, it's showing me 12 minutes, 15, 16 minutes, 18 minutes. The time code meter or box in WaveLab has a lot of different features. And as you can see, I have it set to clip start time. You can change it to CD start time. And this is so crucial because as a mastering engineer, your client might say, at 2 minutes and 40 seconds on song 3, I hear a problem, or this or that needs to happen. And if you're in your Cubase or Pro Tools, it's really hard to find a specific time on anything other than the first song. Because once you get beyond the first song, if you take that out of the equation and you only have this overall timeline, how do you find 2 minutes and 40 seconds on song 4? You're wasting way too much time trying to do that and then do that. So what you want to do is set your time code to be for the CD track start. So now I can see that on song 4, I'm listening to 1 minute and 50 seconds. I can easily find, well, this song isn't very long. I can easily find 2 minutes and 30 seconds or whatever I need to find and do what I need to do, whether it's, I just did a project where the client had a couple specific times where he wanted the level to come down a little bit because the mixes were not dynamic enough. So I was able to just find those spots, draw some volume nodes, and now I'm turning that part down or up or all sorts of fun stuff. So the time code is one of the, I would say, a significant factor of, or at least a significant difference of why I would have a hard time doing this kind of work in a mixing DAW, just for the time code alone, because you really need to know the minutes and seconds of each track, for doing certain tasks. Or sometimes it's a fade out request. It's, can we start fading out at 320 and be done by 330? Well, yes, it's very easy to do because, you can look at the clip. You can make the clip exactly 3 minutes and 30 seconds by typing it in. And there's a number of ways you can read the fade out. It tells you how much you're fading it out, as you can see right by my cursor. Or you can kind of look at there's a whole number of ways, and you can do different fade shapes. So there's a whole number of reasons why we need a time code that's specific to each track. A big value, in my opinion. So let's look at some other notes. Replacing files. This comes up a lot in mastering, and it's important to precisely replace files. If you are mixing, you can kind of eyeball things and go by feel. If you have to import a new backing vocal or keyboard overdub or tambourine track or something. But in mastering, if the client loves everything about the master, but they have to send you a new mix, you need to make sure that nothing changes with the timing. So let me just duplicate this. And let's say my client sent me mix 2. They say, we love what you did, but we got to send you mix 2 of this song because we forgot the tambourine, which is something that's happened. The tambourine was muted. So I say, no problem. I'm going to save as version 2. I always save as a new version because you always want to be able to get back to version 1 and know what you did there. Because sometimes it's important to know if you did 0.5 decibels, 0.6, whatever. But, in your mixing program, it's typically a little bit of a hassle to drag in a new file and line it up. With WaveLab, I have a shortcut to do it very quickly, as you can see. But, so I just replaced it with mix 2. Everything else, as you can see, it's in perfect sync. All the clip effects, if I had any, would stay there. Let me load some in and show you. Clip effects. So let's say the client loves the master. We just got to import this new mix. There's a shortcut to do it the slow way, I believe. It's going to be very slow because I don't do it often. Yeah, replace audio file. And you can browse for the file. And it'll be mix 2. So now, there you got mix 2 in your session. All the plugins stay the same. The timing stays the same. It couldn't be simpler, and it couldn't be more accurate and fail-safe. So it's easy to replace files. It's also easy to do instrumental versions. So let's say the client approves the master, but you got to make the instrumental master, which can be a little time-consuming and tedious. Well, all you have to do is save as and put instrumental in the name, whatever you want. Then you just have to go find the instrumental versions on wherever you have them on your hard drive, and there you go. All the instrumental versions are now in the session. And you can be certain that they have the exact same processing, exact same spacing of songs if that needs to happen, exact same fades, exact same everything. And then you, of course, maybe want to update the title so that when you render them, it says instrumental in the name. But you get the idea. It's so easy to replace files for various reasons, whether it's new mix versions, instrumental versions, TV mixes, radio edits, all that stuff. Another thing WaveLab has is an external editor feature. So WaveLab does have its own editor, and you can do spectral editing within it. You know, if you're familiar with spectral editing, it has some pretty powerful tools for spectral editing. Now that Steinberg has spectral layers, I think that's become the focus of spectral editing as a separate app. But even if you don't use spectral layers, let's say you're familiar with a different program, you can highlight a section, press a shortcut. Now that section is open in Isotope RX. I could remove that click or whatever it is, or I could DS that S. Whatever you need to do it, close it, and when you go back to WaveLab, the fixed version is in place. So it's really nice for doing external edits of, you know, whatever you need to do for spectral repair. One thing I should say about clips is you can split up the clips. You know, if the first part of the song needs different processing, you can split it up. Probably would want to do, well, you probably want to split it in a better place. You can do a little crossfade. And now this intro could have a different clip effects chain than the rest of the song. So you can split up clips and things like that. Let's see here. You know, I've talked about managing the markers, but again, that's a huge part of mastering, is knowing exactly when not only when does the next song audibly start, but when does the track marker. This is a pretty typical transition where we have, you know, that song dies out, whatever that is. We have a little bit of intended space to let the song breathe. Then we have about 200 milliseconds on the next track of silence. And then again, that first downbeat. So all very important mastering details that are just hard to manage in a different program, especially without ripple edit. Because if you did want to tweak this and you don't have ripple editing, then now you got to tweak that one a little bit. And now you're just kind of getting sloppy and it leaves too much room for error. So track markers, it's just so much easier. Now I want to talk about rendering files, because rendering is a big part of mastering, because for one, it can take a little while depending on how many plugins you're using, what sample rate you're working at. I'm just going to go back to the cleaner version to make this a little easier. So rendering is a big part of mastering because it takes time and you have to make sure it's accurate, because this is true with any program. I'm sure this has happened to you. I'm sure you've rendered or exported or bounced a mix that sounded fine on playback, but when you listen to the bounced file, hopefully before you send it to mastering, maybe there's an issue. Maybe a plugin made a glitch. Maybe the first downbeat was chopped off. Maybe the render cut off before the end of the song, whether it's the little tail or in the middle of the last chorus. Rendering is important. And on that note, you know, I always check my renders in the audio editor before I send them out. I wanted to talk about one other meter that WaveLab has, and that is a bit depth meter. Built right in. I keep it floating on a shortcut. The bit depth meter is really handy for analyzing incoming files and your outgoing files, and just knowing if and when you need to dither. What am I trying to show here? I check my incoming files a lot, because here's one that recently came in, an unmastered mix. And this isn't a huge deal in this file, but as you can see, it's a 32-bit file, 32-bit floating point file. But when I press play, watch what happens. The audio itself is only 24-bit. Now that's not a deal breaker. I didn't ask for a new file in this case, but I have received 32-bit and 24-bit files that only have 16 bits of audio. And this means that whoever created the mix, maybe they had a limiter inserted that was dithering to 16-bit. And even though they made the file that they bounced 24-bit or 32-bit float, the audio itself was only 16-bit, and that I think, you know, reducing to 16-bit before mastering is a little bit unfortunate. You'd probably want to ask for some new files in that case. So the bit depth meter is another built-in meter of WaveLab that I find useful for incoming files, outgoing files, all that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure I got that in there. But let's talk about rendering files, because that's a big, and again, the way that you render files in WaveLab is a huge part of why I use it. Use WaveLab because the rendering, the metadata, all that stuff is just so much, not necessarily easier, but mastering focused and mindful of mastering, you know, the way files are rendered. So I can obviously render this track by track right now, but this is also not a WaveLab specific thing. I know people that use Sequoia, other mastering engineers tend to do this process where we render the entire project as one long file. And the reason we do that is because if you're rendering track by track with a heavy plugin load, some plugins don't behave correctly in the first few milliseconds or even first second of the rendering process. And this is not something you may notice when you're bouncing out of your mix session, because you typically have a few seconds of silence before the song starts. You know, if you have a mixing section open of one song and you bounce it, you usually have a little bit of dead space on the starter. And but in mastering, not only do we have big plug-in loads at high sample rates, we usually have pretty immediate audio. So a lot of people, like I said, well, I could render a wave of each song right now. A lot of mastering engineers that I shouldn't say a lot, but I know about quite a few, and myself included, we render the entire montage as one long file first. And that may seem like an extra step, but it saves you a lot of time downstream. And it prevents any plugin issues, because especially in the case of this song overlap, if I rendered with a big plugin chain, if I rendered track by track, this one's going to have a hard start, and there's a really good chance that there's going to be a little click or pop or irregularity there. And I've seen on a lot of forums, you know, people are asking, how can I make gapless master files that aren't going to have a click or a pop on streaming or the CD? And the easiest way is to do the render in one initial pass. So WaveLab has a feature for that. Again, I think I'm not running any plugins, so this will go fast. Obviously, the waveforms are not going to be as loud as if I were mastering, but let's just look past that. So we can do something like this and do the initial render as one long file. And again, you might think this is crazy, but this actually just saves so much headache down the line. And the first render, if I had plugins on, the first render, you know, if it was mastered, it would look more like that. The first render would take, you know, a few minutes at least, because it's it's doing all the processing. But once that's done, then you can render very quickly track by track, because other than dithering, there's no plugins running. So, you know, once this is rendered, I could save it as a new thing. And I have all the plugins locked in. WaveLab 11 comes with a great plugin called Lin Pro Dither, or Lin Dither. Yeah, Lin Pro Dither. This is built into WaveLab. It's developed by a company called MAAT. So whatever dither you like to use, this is a place to use it. So here I can render, now I can render track by track, you know, 24-bit 96K wave files. And now I have a nice folder filling up with wave files. And again, these are all going to have metadata. Let's wait till it renders. So there's a number of ways to get down to 44.1, and I'm going to show you my preferred way. You could use the batch processor in WaveLab. Some mastering engineers like to use either Sericon or RX. My point is, you can use anything third-party sample rate conversion that you'd like, or you can use the one built into WaveLab. WaveLab uses the SOX algorithm. It's very good sounding. But as you can see, these files are still rendering because the Dither plugin is a little intense. But as you can see, I have metadata in all these files. And I'll never have to, I don't even have, because I did the metadata to start with, I never have to think about metadata again. It's just automatically. Now there are some presets involved. You have to watch my other videos. There's a metadata tab here, and my preset was already loaded. So there are some things that you have to set up one time when you first start using WaveLab and then forget about it. Let's say, it's great to have 24-bit 96K WAV files, but some people need lower sample rates, and I've externally sample rate converted this file you're looking at to 44.1. Now I'm telling WaveLab to recreate the audio montage at 44.1K. I could have done 48K if you need 48K versions. So now this montage is perfectly recreated. The processing's already locked in. The track markers are the same. Watch as I flip from version to version. The timing of the track stays exactly the same. And now I could, and this is another thing I like about WaveLab, is the rendering location. All I have to do is change 2 numbers and hit go. This folder is automatically created for me. So now I'm rendering 24-bit 44K versions in case that's what you need. If you need to make a DDP, you could save as this montage. And again, these montage files are tiny. We're talking 20 kilobytes. So it's not recreating the WAV files. It's just doing a little montage file. I could change this to 16-bit. Now I'm rendering 16-bit 44.1. Well, actually, I forgot to change the dither setting, so let's change that to 16-bit. Now we are rendering that. If I had to make a DDP, I could simply open up the DDP box. All I have to do is change a few letters, and now it's creating the DDP folder for me. If I need MP3s with artwork and metadata, again, the metadata is already sitting there, but let's say I want to add the artwork. I can just open the metadata tab, add the artwork file. And if I'm going too fast, this is meant to be an overview, and there's plenty of videos where I take it slower. But I changed the format to MP3, make a folder, and here we have a folder of MP3s filling up. And if I open these in iTunes or any media player, I'm going to open them up in this metadata app because I don't need to play audio. But now you can see, not only does it have the artist name and song title, it has the track number and track total. I forgot to add the ISRC codes, but that's very easy to do with the CD wizard. You can type in the first code or paste in the first code, and it populates everything up from there automatically. And then again, if you do it in your master montage, you never have to do it again. It all carries over downstream very nicely. So now you've got some nice looking MP3 files. So now I've got all these folders of various formats. I know I'm getting a little long, but I want to talk about vinyl masters because vinyl is very popular right now. So typically I would make the vinyl master after the client approves the digital mastering. So let's say a few days later, the client says, we love the master, let's wrap it up. I don't deliver all these files right away. I wait till I deliver one format, and then once it's approved, I make some of the alternates, like the high res, the MP3s, but that's just how easy it is to cycle through it. Let's say that a few days later, the client says it's good to go. I can make the vinyl master. I can reopen the master montage that has all my processing running live, and just branch off of that. I could save as. I have a little shortcut for it, Vinyl Master version 1. I could do the things I need to do to make it vinyl friendly, typically easing up or removing any limiting. That's a whole nother topic for a whole nother time. But the things that are more fact-based would be things like we need to render a WAV file for each side of the record. Most cutting engineers don't want a single file for each song. Some might. Typically, I think 99.9% of the vinyl masters I deliver are one file per side, but it's a little more complicated than that, and that's where WaveLab comes in again to help you out. And I'll show you why. So let's say we got to make the vinyl master. Now, I don't want to touch the song spacing because the client loves the song spacing. I do need to make sure that, we're going to do 3 songs per side. It's a short record. I do need to make sure there's no audio overlap between songs 3 and 4 because that's where the record's going to split. But other than that, I don't touch anything. I might adjust some plugins to make it more vinyl friendly. But here's what we do to make a nice vinyl master file. We use the CD tab, which I know is a little bit ironic, but we go to the CD tab, we make CD track groups. And as you can see, you can make 26 track groups. I've never used more than 6 for a triple LP would require 6 groups, 1 for each side. I've never gone beyond that. But let's say this is, again, a short record. So I'm going to say songs 1 through 3 are side A, and songs 4 through 6 are side B. Now, a lot of this applies to making cassette masters too. So, and I've done a whole WaveLab video just focusing on vinyl and cassette masters if you want to know more. But this is the quick version. Tell it which songs are on each side, and make sure it sounds the way you want it to sound. And now we can render the vinyl master. And I would just typically add the word vinyl to that folder instead of MP3. I would typically copy the project name of some kind. And now I'm rendering. That went so fast I got to go this way because there's no plugins. So that's part of it, is rendering 1 file per side. If the person is using a DAW that can read markers, it's going to actually have the markers to tell them where each song starts. But what's really cool about WaveLab is you can generate a PDF file that tells the cutting engineer where each song starts. So again, I'm doing this quickly. Check out the website if you want the slow way. I spelled vinyl wrong because I'm going too fast, but I'm going to save them in that folder. I'm going to use my vinyl preset here. I'm going to tell track, I want to make a report for track group A, which is side A. I tend to add a little bit of extra text so they can't miss it. And then again for side B. I didn't adjust the name. I usually name this side A and B as well. So I misnamed the first one. We'll fix that manually. But what we have here are nice sheets that tell the cutting engineer there's 3 tracks on side A. Here's where they all start and end, and here's the total length of that side. Same with side B. So the reason a normal mixing program can't do this is because in the session, side B start, again, this is a fictitious album, but in the session, side B starts at about 1148. But the file for side B starts at 0, right? Because it's a new file. So we wouldn't want to give them a report that says this particular song starts at 1148. That means nothing to them. So we have this nice report that says this song, Roman a Clef, starts at 0 because it starts at 0 on the file for side B. And again, you have a nice folder with just the 2 WAV files and the 2 PDFs. You can send that out. You can zip it up and send it off to mastering or the cutting engineer, and that's what they need to cut the record. And the same is true for cassettes. Again, watch that video for more details, but usually cassette and vinyl manufacturers want 1 file per side, and they really appreciate a PDF that tells them where the songs start and end, because it may be obvious to you where the songs start and end, but for people cutting records all day, every week, every day, things start to sound the same, and they need to know precisely where each song really starts, things like that. So, and the same is true for CD reports, and it doesn't even have to be a CD, but you can make a report for the project. Let's say, let me just go here. I can print out a report that has, all the official song titles, their duration, where they start, where they end. Some of them, if I would have remembered to put ISRC codes in, it would list it here. A lot of clients appreciate having this little file to accompany their masters, so they have all the details to reference later, and so they can know that everything is spelled correctly, and things like that. So you can make reports for anything, even in the CD master, the digital master, and of course vinyl and cassette masters. So I'm just checking my notes one last time. And yeah, so I'm a proponent of putting metadata in the files, even though in a lot of cases the streaming service, your digital distributor requires you to enter it again. But my opinion is, if you have the information, put it in there, because people that are doing music licensing or anything in the future, it's good to have the information embedded. And it all translates to CD text too. If I were to open the DDP that I made in a DDP player, you can see all these titles. And again, I skipped the UPC and ISRC, but it's all important stuff when it comes to mastering. The details matter. One last thing I want to talk about, which comes up a lot, is using analog gear. Starting with WaveLab 10, WaveLab got a lot better with integrating analog equipment in the mastering process. There's two ways to do it. I need to switch my sound card to show you how I like to do it. So I have a little template already ready to go for using the analog gear. That little white blob is actually a test tone, because I like to use a test tone to test the gear, make sure everything's correct. But let's say, and obviously I trim that out later. Let's say I want to load in some songs. I'll use these same set. This is kind of how you can do it. There's actually two ways. I'm going to show you my favorite way, and I'll show you the other way. So I'm going to insert these files in, again, whatever order I want. And I'm going to have them insert on this track right here. And my second screen disconnected. I'm going to try to get it back. Come on, second screen. All right, second screen is back. So as you can see, I've loaded these files onto a reference track. And reference tracks, aside from all the things I told you about, reference tracks are also good for sending audio out to the analog chain. And then you record it back onto a normal montage track. So I've put these songs, I'm going to, in the real world, I'm going to trim these up and sequence them later. That's why there's extra space between them. But again, same concept. I can meta normalize them. I have to solo it first. I can meta normalize these to a certain level that I think is great for hitting my analog chain. There's no right number. That's something you have to determine for yourself. Let me just give it a name. So, similar concept here. You can put plugins on each clip, which would be before the analog chain. Maybe you want to do some EQ sweetening or a little de-essing or something before going analog. The nice thing with reference tracks is, as you can see, I'm feeding feeding 3 of my D to A converters. So I have a Crane Song head, an RME, and a Dangerous D to A. And I'm feeding these all at the same time. And then on my mastering console, I can decide which one feeds the analog chain. And on the way back in, on this top track, similar thing. I have 4 options for recording back in. I have the Crane Song head, the Neve, the RME again, and the Dangerous. So I have 4 analog to digital converters that I can choose from, and I can toggle them in real time and decide which one sounds best for this song. Is it this one? Is it that one? They all sound good, but which one's best? Being able to hear it in real time is really kind of eye-opening and ear-opening, because that's when you hear a little detail. Is this one more favorable for that song? But point is, you loop it. Reference track to send it out. Normal track to record it in. There's an input monitor. And then there's obviously the record arm. And then once you record it back in, you can do basically what I showed you so far in the montage. You can move things around. sequence things, fade, all the track markers. The other way to use the analog gear is, the other nice thing is I can have a reference limiter, meaning I'm listening through a limiter to get an idea of what it sounds like with a little bit of limiting, but I'm not committing to this limiter yet. This allows me to fine-tune things after the capture, do revisions before limiting, do a vinyl master without limiting. So in this section, because it's the montage output, it is, since it's the montage output, it is, I just want to make sure I'm still streaming. The montage output is just kind of running live, and it's just a reference limiter, and I can fine-tune it later. So that is a quick version of how I do it. And then there's also the external effects plugins, which is probably a whole nother topic, but you can use a plugin that's called external effects. And with that method, you can route audio in and out of your audio device, and it's just, to me, it's a little more limiting and more less flexible way to do it. But there is the let me just show you what it looks like, because it's been redesigned for those that haven't seen it in a while. External effects. There's this plugin as well. I don't use this method, but you can send and return and adjust the latency to your liking. But again, you're kind of locked in. It's just two different ways of working. I prefer the way I showed you with the reference track. So before I go back, you can save different configurations. So I've got all my inputs and outputs set up, playback chains, but I'm going to go back to my simple setup, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys if you have any questions, because I know it's been going for a little while. I tend to do that, but if you have any questions about WaveLab in general, anything I showed you, any future topics, you can tell me now. You can go to the WaveLab users group on Facebook, ask some questions, things like that. Thanks for letting me know I was live. I got a strange message about no data for a minute, so I got a little concerned, but glad to see it's still live. If there are any questions, don't be shy. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up, and hopefully you got some insight about kind of what makes a mastering program. And, obviously I wouldn't want to mix a song in WaveLab. It'd be a bit of a struggle to mix, and that's why they're just kind of two separate animals, two separate architectures. The whole environment is just a totally different thing. And as you get deeper into mastering, you may, for me, I just started to realize these things that, Pro Tools can't quite do this. I need a special program. And then it just kept adding up all these little things. And then at some point I just switched over. So I'm just going to make sure this isn't frozen. Yeah, so if there's no questions, I appreciate you watching. As mentioned, WaveLab is 40% off up until February 4th, 2022, for those who are watching this later. So basically a solid month. Steinberg has given 40% off of upgrades and full purchases. There's no code needed. You just go to the website and the prices are already discounted. A couple people have asked sometime in 2022, Steinberg is going to change their licensing system, because to use the Pro version of WaveLab, and I think the Pro version of any of their software, you need the physical USB dongle. At some point this year, that's going to change, and you won't need the physical dongle to run the Pro version, which will be nice for laptop users and those that are traveling. You'll be able to do, with one purchase, you'll be able to authorize up to 3 computers, is my understanding. And that way you can have your main studio computer, your laptop, and you can open up WaveLab without any USB thing sticking out of your computer, which will be very, very nice and very freeing. So, yeah, we're going to wrap it up. But thanks again, everyone, for watching, especially if it's getting late over in Europe and beyond. Appreciate all your interest in WaveLab, and don't hesitate to join us on the group. I'm still reading the questions. Let me see if I missed any. The next WaveLab live stream will be in February. I'm still picking a topic. I'm not quite understanding what a logical editor is. There isn't a native solution for macro commands, but I have a stream deck that works very well in WaveLab. I've also started using Keyboard Maestro, which is a very affordable third-party app, which is similar to the Stream Deck, but you don't need to have a physical unit next to you, which is good for traveling. I am reading the chat. I don't know if I'm missing some messages. As far as RX Connect goes, yeah, there is the RX Connect feature, but it can be a little iffy. Whereas the external editor feature I showed you, it bypasses RX Connect entirely, which is nice. And it's just a really direct way of doing external edits. If I missed any questions, feel free to re-ask them, but I'm not seeing any that I missed. So maybe my feed is not... I see a lot of see you laters, but I'm not seeing any questions. If anyone wants to re-ask it, feel free. Otherwise, we're going to close it up here, and you can ask any questions over on Facebook. Yeah, logical editor must be a Cubase feature. I'm not familiar with that term, but again, I've not used Cubase myself. Yeah, this stream and all the ones I've done are available on YouTube. If you search the WaveLab YouTube channel from Steinberg. And then I've also cross-posted them to wavelabhelp.com. It's the same videos. They'll be available for a long time. A lot of what I've covered is not in WaveLab Elements. I don't have it on this computer to show you, but you know, the name Elements is a good name for it. It has the basics that I've showed you, but I think for anyone that's mastering on a daily or regular basis, you're probably going to want to use the Pro version. But again, the Elements version is a good place to get started, get a feel for it, things like that. And then if you're getting, you know, if you're feeling limited by Elements, then you can upgrade for a very reasonable price to the Pro version, especially right now. But Elements, you know, has limited metadata. It can't do DDP files. Has less of the metering options. So. All right. Well, a couple questions are trickling in yet, but for the most part, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you again for watching. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you in February with the next live stream. Watch the social media and WaveLab users group on Facebook for the announcement of the date and time and the topic.